Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. So earlier this week, Parliament lodged an urgent application with the Constitutional Court requesting that it be granted a further extension from the 10th of this month until the 28th of February to finalise the Electoral Amendment Bill. However, on Friday, the Apex Court set the deadline to the 31st of January next year. Parliament says it still needs time to conduct more public hearings on the bill. Let's make sense of these developments and bring in our guest. Tselane is Executive Chair of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, live to us via our video link this afternoon. Great to have you on the program, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. I mean, the immediate question, of course, now that yet another extension has been granted, is whether we feel the IEC will have enough time to prepare for what looks like is going to be an unprecedented election in 2024.
Thank you very much for having me. I think I have raised this concern before that, unfortunately, the delay in implementing the Constitutional Court judgment has already caused some difficulties for the preparation of the elections. And I think this extension will obviously begin to encroach on the time that is required for the purpose of preparing for 2024 national and provincial elections.
Sure. And before we actually talk about the potential consequences of that, perhaps let's unpack the reasons why Parliament is asking for yet another extension. Part of it is because of these two major changes that were made by the National Council of Provinces, we're told. One, to create a clause so that a panel can be put together to look into more extensive changes to the bill itself. The other is about ensuring that independent candidates can have signatures such that they have an equal chance, essentially, with competing against political parties. I've really paraphrased it here. But from your vantage point, are these reasons good enough to ask for an extension?
Absolutely. I think those are noble intentions, particularly because you may recall that quite a number of civil society organizations and some of us had raised issues about some of the weaknesses within the bill. And the issues that we have raised are some of the weaknesses that we had identified in the current bill. And now that Parliament is trying to address some of those weaknesses, we really have got to applaud them. But unfortunately, as I indicated, the time really is not on their side in terms of ensuring that these issues will be attended to. And then I doubt also that even the current extension that has been given will allow Parliament to be able to deal with all the issues that they're supposed to deal with. And I don't think they've got sufficient time to do the necessary consultations that they were supposed to do. So I would have thought that in order to get out of the morass that we find ourselves in, that Parliament was going to ask for the suspension of the invalidity until after the 2024 elections. By so doing, they would allow the current Electoral Act to be used for the purpose of 2024 elections. And then they could then go on an extensive exercise of reviewing the whole Electoral Act and the electoral process that need to be put in place for the future elections. But to try to deal with these issues in time for 2024 is likely to create some difficulties for the preparations of the elections on the part of the IEC, but secondly, on the part of the independents who are supposed to be participating for the first time in this process.
Interesting take there, because, there have been other legal experts who are saying that it's also unthinkable to have the country hold an election using an act that has already been declared unlawful or unconstitutional, as it were, by the Constitutional Court. You're saying there is some kind of middle ground by suspending that unconstitutionality or invalidity of the act.
Absolutely, because remember that when the Constitutional Court allowed Parliament, firstly, 24 months to develop a new electoral act based on that judgment, they actually suspended, that is the Constitutional Court suspended the invalidity for 24 months. And then now they've extended it again until January. So if it is possible for them to do so, it was actually going to be making things much more easier by extending that suspension until after the 2024 elections, so that things are not rushed in the manner that they have been rushed and then you end up with a situation where we are not able to have the elections within a constitutionally stipulated period.
I wonder then what to make of this decision by the Constitutional Court to grant this extension, even though you do have that feeling that the extension itself is not really going to make a difference. In other words, it's not going to allow Parliament the time it needs, given what still needs to be done.
Absolutely. I don't think that we'll actually be able to get sufficient time. But besides, it is also giving IEC only 14 months to start preparing for the elections and putting in place systems that will be able to implement the new arrangement. And the new arrangement, it's something completely new, even for the IEC and its staff. They've got to recruit staff. They've got to, make sure that they understand the legal principles around what is going to be happening and ensure that they can actually be able to implement the new act. And I think this is going to be really putting the IEC under tremendous pressure.
Given your experience, you've worked with the IEC before, do you see this country holding elections with a revised Electoral Act?
I have indicated my anxiety in the past to say that I don't think that it is possible to have a proper, free and fair elections within a constitutionally stipulated period with the kind of the constraints that we find ourselves in.
If then you were advising Parliament, perhaps the IEC, what kind of way forward would you suggest? Because there is also, of course, the option, although it's unlikely the Constitutional Court would agree to this, of potentially postponing the elections until we've been able to sort out issues around this Election Amendment Bill.
Absolutely. In fact, for that second option, because as I've indicated, the first option is to extend the invalidity of the Electoral Act and still operate within the current Act, but it means that the independents would not be participating in the 2024 elections if this is granted by the Constitutional Court. But the second option is that of having to extend, rather to postpone the elections and to have the elections outside the constitutionally stipulated period. Now, as we know from what happened last time, the IEC does not have to approach the Constitutional Court. In fact, Parliament itself has got the powers to change the Constitution in order to allow for the elections to take place outside a constitutionally stipulated period. But I think you and I, having gauged the mood in the country, we can tell that there is definitely going to be an uproar if Parliament attempted to postpone the elections to have these elections outside a constitutionally stipulated period.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about the mood. I mean, it was just days ago when the DA was calling for early elections. I don't think they'd necessarily be supporting the move to change the constitution to delay those polls. But it does raise questions about what the way forward looks like, because even if, let's say, there weren't these calls for an early election, which is on a different matter around Phalaphala, there also would need to be a two-thirds majority in Parliament for there to be changes to the Constitution, and that itself is quite the hill to climb.
Absolutely, there cannot be any changes to the Constitution without achieving a two-thirds majority. So it would mean that all the political parties would have to accept the rationale for the postponement of the elections and to have the elections outside the constitutionally stipulated period. And then if there is no agreement amongst the political parties over it, then it means Parliament will actually find itself in a very difficult position, and IEC would unfortunately have to deal with the elections that are not going to be able to be free and fair, and that they would not be smooth. And then also the independents who are supposed to be participating will be participating in an environment and a framework that is very, very confusing.
Sure. What a time to be alive. As the cliche goes, we'll wait and see how it all unfolds. For now, thanks very much indeed for your insights on this. Tselane is Executive Chair of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa. Once again, as always, thanks very much indeed for your time.